Welcome. Today, an issue starkly missing from the presidential campaign, poverty. We'll ask why and examine the president's record. Then an insider's look at journalism in turmoil, one man's wild ride from Business Week to the blogosphere. Then, how would you spend $1 million to improve your neighborhood? Participatory budgeting has hit the Big Apple. And later on in the hour, the Newtown Creek Armada. Artists use toy boats with cameras to navigate a polluted waterway and illuminate its future. First, Debate This, our pre-election series on issues that have fallen off the radar. New census numbers show the national poverty rate stuck at record levels. Over 46 million Americans are officially poor. In the 1960s, a president could declare war on poverty and be heroic, or at least reelected. Today, too risky. How come? What's changed? What can be done to get poverty back into the national conversation? Joining us, David R. Jones, the president and CEO of the Community Service Society, which through research and action has worked on behalf of low-income New Yorkers since 1843. Poverty is nothing new. Also with us, Bob Herbert, former op-ed columnist at the New York Times, now a distinguished senior fellow at Demos, which advocates for a more equitable economy. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Ron.
And Bob, you recently wrote a blog post for Demos, which wound up getting picked up by the Grio, and then lo and behold, a rebuttal from the White House. You want to tell us that story?
A defensive rebuttal. You know, I had actually was just interviewing in David's shop, as a matter of fact, a group of youngsters, high school kids from the Bronx, and talking to them about their lives. And it got pretty emotional in describing their difficult circumstances. They were from poor families. Some of the youngsters actually started crying, and I wrote a piece about it. And I just mentioned almost in passing that neither of the presidential candidates was really talking about the things that would have an effect on these youngsters' lives. And the White House responded, you know, talking about all the things that they have been doing for the poor.
Like what?
Well, the White House would tell you that very much of their stimulus program in response to the economic crisis was helpful to poor people, and that's in fact true. And then the support given to state and local governments, some of the initiatives designed to create jobs that have to do, for example, with infrastructure. They poured a lot of money into education. So all of that is true. It's not that the administration has not done anything for poor people, but this is a profound problem in our country right now. And as you pointed out, neither presidential candidate has made this a cornerstone of their campaign.
So, David, assessing the Obama administration, is it fair to say that they have been dealing with poverty issues? They're just not talking about it in those terms?
I think there's no question that they've done things, and I think Bob has talked to them. They bailed out the New York public housing with enormous amounts of money for infrastructure, not enough. But I think they're avoiding the issue, and I think you saw a little brief flurry when Romney tried to link Obama to food stamps. How terrible that was, giving people, you know, subsidized food, which, given the fact that not only are people who are poor dependent upon that, but many of the farmers in the United States are also dependent upon people having food stamps. So, but it's true that this has not been a major source of debate. I'd be surprised if the debate between the two candidates really focuses on that. It's not seen as a mainstream issue anymore in the United States.
And I think an important thing to add is, irrespective of what's been done and what's been helpful, and there's a lot that has been helpful, this is a growing problem and it's going to continue. So we need to be dealing with it. You know, more and more people are falling into poverty. People are falling out of the middle class, and it's becoming more and more difficult for people who are poor to get out of poverty. So we need to address it.
You know, and I also think that part of the reaction you're starting, the more extreme reactions in the United States, Tea Party and the rest, is a sense now not about my constituents, blacks and Latino poor and others, but actually middle America seeing itself slide closer and closer to being poor.
Right.
And watching their children end up that way and wanting someone to blame. to scapegoat.
It's like the food stamps issue, which is a double-edged sword. When Romney or Gingrich, who really pushed it during the primaries, calls Obama a food stamp president, you probably agree that that's racially coded.
Right.
But on the other hand, they can turn around and say, well, look at the number of Americans who are on food stamps compared to the beginning of the Obama administration. We just want people not to be so poor that they need food stamps.
And it's the best form of stimulus. The money does not hang around or go offshore. It goes to grocery stores, which are sort of the engine of most small communities, and it goes right out. There's no hiding under the mattress or buying frills. Food stamps are the most direct stimulus you can come up with.
Well, part of the problem is that we really don't have a national conversation on this issue and a number of other important issues. So you can have these sound bites that, you know, in some cases they're dog whistle type comments and that sort of thing that can have an impact, a negative impact, obviously, from my perspective. Whereas if they were in the context of a conversation designed to make people understand what's going on, they wouldn't have that kind of an effect.
Why do you think that is, Bob, that we're not having this national conversation? As I said in the intro, America did have it in the 1960s. The president, even a president running for re-election at the time, Lyndon Johnson, was able to run on a war on poverty.
Politicians don't think that there's an upside to it. One, over many years, poverty has been racialized. It's been ridiculous and it's been unfair and it's been bigoted, but nevertheless, it has happened. So an awful lot of people in this country look at anti-poverty programs and they feel our taxes are being taken away from us to, you know, help those folks. And, you know, the idea is that they're undeserving. Exactly. They don't work or whatever. They're the other. The other thing that I think has been important is when we talk about Lyndon Johnson, and this country doesn't talk about him enough, and the Democratic Party doesn't talk about him enough, but when we talk about Lyndon Johnson and the war on poverty, this was a time when the economy was booming, when there were plenty of jobs for people, the middle class was expanding, whereas for many years now we've been in tough times, middle class is under the gun, so much less willingness to reach out and help others.
I want to put up some stats, some pie charts actually, and bar graphs from your think tank, Demos, that have to do with poverty then and now. And these are very revealing and they're visual, folks, so take a look at these charts. You'll even see them move a little bit. So this is as of 2010, overall poverty. So that's the percentage of Americans as represented visually who are in poverty. The light blue is extreme poverty, what's considered extreme poverty. Now, let's look back to the late 1960s when we see that there was still about the same amount of total poverty, but the percentage in extreme poverty was actually significantly lower. So does that mean, David Jones, that all this money that we've been spending on anti-poverty programs since the Great Society has been wasted?
There are structural changes that have been going on that we recognize. Actually, we know from our research that in New York City, you're having poverty rates for African Americans in the 23-24% range, 28% for Latinos. And this is clearly the decisions on welfare reform. We sold the public that we could remove parts of the safety net and limit parts of the safety net. I think there's only a fraction of the number of people getting direct grant relief now, but that the private economy would pick up and make everything not only cheaper for everybody, but much better for everybody.
Which in the first years after that Clinton-Gingrich 1996 welfare reform was the case because it happened to coincide with the tech bubble.
Well, that gets to what I think is the most important aspect of this issue. As necessary as the safety net programs are, and we should definitely not be weakening them, that it should not be the focal point of the fight against poverty. Employment is the most important thing. You have to put people to work. And that's where nobody really has an answer in this country right now. We don't have an employment program.
But maybe this is one answer, and that's the next chart from Demos, or maybe the answer is implied here. This is poverty by education level. And again, we start with the present, 2010, the most recent statistics available. The pie with the blue is people who only have a high school education or less, less than a high school education, and the high school, I guess, is in orange. Now we go back in time to the late 1960s, and there's still plenty of poverty among those groups, but it's easier to stay out of poverty, David, with only a high school diploma or with even less than a high school diploma than it is today.
And there's no question that when we look at the graduation rate for blacks and Latinos in the city of New York, which is only at 55%, despite all the educational reform and discussion, we've got a huge problem. We also have one of the worst GED passage rates in the country, and we really haven't been addressing this. I mean, we have schools of excellence in New York, we have charter schools, and the entire discussion basically is shifted around how you're going to really start to allocate resources sufficient in poor enough neighborhoods to actually make a difference.
And politically speaking, I think, Bob, that both the Democratic and the Republican Party have accepted the notion that through the global economy, we're going to outsource a lot of low-skill jobs that would have stayed here. So our economic future is in high-skill jobs, which makes education an absolute imperative.
Except that I don't think that this issue is particularly well understood. I think we have to be really careful. It's obvious that you need, some kind of education beyond high school if you're going to have a middle-class standard of living in this country. But to assume that getting beyond a high school diploma will get you entree into the middle class is a mistake. It's getting harder and harder. The problem is that there are not enough jobs, and an awful lot of kids with four-year college degrees are holding jobs that in years past did not require a college education. And they're pushing out the kids who have a high school education who used to hold those kinds of jobs.
We have a very graphic report on this issue when Krugman, actually, in the Times, talked about the trouble college graduates were happening. We had done a report some years ago on security guards. There are 60,000 plus security guards. They were earning then about $11 an hour, no health benefits. This is a real low-wage job. We just updated that report. 50% of security guards now have either a BA or some college.
Wow.
So suddenly, just what Bob is saying, there's a bumping problem going on,
Yeah.
that even low-wage jobs aren't available to people who have done everything right.
And then just to compound the problem, a lot of the young people who have come out of college who have work, whether they're low-wage work or work that requires a college education, have these enormous college loans hanging over them. And that's making it much more difficult for them to get a start on a mature life moving forward, to get married, to have children, to make a down payment on that first home. So we have some really complex problems here, which is why we need office holders and political candidates to be talking candidly about them.
And they have to talk it more broadly than just inner city kids. This is becoming a universal problem. I watch in Suffolk as you have this really anti-immigrant wave that's sweeping among, middle class whites there.
Out on Long Island.
Scapegoating Latinos for why their kids can't find work anymore. You look upstate New York and the graduation rates are horrific. And the same problem of young people who are not finding any niche in the society, not being able to look to the same kind of economic future that their parents had. And this is going to be the engine for all sorts of distortions in the political life of the country. Someone has to honestly address this thing and stop using these sort of code words that this is only a problem of blacks and Latinos.
And I know that we could open up the phones and take calls all day from people who would define themselves as formerly middle class, now poor, especially in the last 4 years.
Very much so.
Now, there would be pushback, especially from the political right, from people who would say, we've also seen in this country an explosion among all races and ethnic groups of single female-headed households with children, and that when you look at the percentage of those kids who are in poverty, it's huge compared to kids in two-parent-headed households. Do we need to talk about this at the level of personal choice too?
That should be part of the conversation. It's an extremely important issue. But once you start talking about it, you also need to be talking about what's required to have a viable marriage and family. Excuse me. And so just simply saying that someone who's had a child should get married or should marry the father of that child, if this is someone who's not working, who can't contribute to a reasonable family life, that's not helpful.
Or on the other side of that, just pressure on the unmarried dads of those kids. I was at the convention when Obama gave his speech in 2008. And the line that seemed to get the most applause to my ears was when he talked about how fathers need to take responsibility for their children.
And there's no question, viscerally, across the spectrum, people like the idea. But with the rates of unemployment among Black and Latino males, to assume, well, these guys should basically join a household and further drag down the entire constellation of what you've got there. Julius Wilson, a distinguished Chicago professor, has been talking about this for years, that this is not a matter of somehow a loose morals. I remember giving a testimony before the Congress some years ago, and when sort of the Republican at the time started to raise this, I said, you just had 10 or 15 scandals here of essentially congressmen acting inappropriately. So morals is not the issue. Economics is.
I mean, there's a depression in Black America right now. I mean, just drive around Detroit, walk around Camden, New Jersey, go to East St. Louis or South LA. The situation is terrible, and it's not being covered. It's not being talked about. We have to begin to get a handle on it.
So in our last 90 seconds, what would you each say is the most important single, or maybe the one or two, policy prescriptions going forward for all of this?
There is nothing more important than employment, and I think that while we're preparing for a national conversation on this issue, which we should have, we need a 21st century version of WPA jobs in this country. We need to increase the minimum wage. We need to be strengthening rather than weakening labor unions and a number of other initiatives.
I think that when we look at New York City, just looking at that, we have 380,000 people unemployed, and more than half of them now have been out of work more than 6 months. Many of them, a third of them, a year or more. I'm getting more and more worried about how this is going to further destabilize. These were people who were fully employed, who are now out of it. And then, as Bob said, I suddenly have people who were educated, and they too can't get work. Right. I think we have to do something that targets on this population, but work has to be the key to this thing.
A national conversation that needs to be had, and needs to be had more fully, part of our series on topics that are not on either presidential candidate's radar, at least not in their public speech. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Pleasure. Thanks, Brian.
Up next, how to be a journalist in the digital 21st century.
How you doing? My name's Steve. My family's lived in this neighborhood for years. Recently, things got so tight, we had to go to our local food bank for help. I lost a lot of sleep worrying about what the neighbors might think. That is until I saw them there, too. How'd I do, Steve?
A little stiff. You could have done a little better.
What? Come on. You know, I have an Academy Award.
Yeah, but not for playing me.
Play a role in ending hunger. Visit feedingamerica.org/hunger and find your local food bank.
This can't be happening.
This can't be happening.
Of course it's not happening. Armored car. Listen, having money isn't about luck. Make your own coffee, save $1,000 a year. Feed me. Feed the pig.
Welcome to the Solar Generation Road Trip. If you want to know how solar energy is working for America, you have to go out and ask America. We're talking to people from coast to coast who are using solar power every day. From a few panels on a homeowner's roof to large solar plants with enough utility power for a whole town. Solar energy is working for America now, saving us money, creating new jobs, and giving our world a brighter future. Welcome to the Solar Generation.
On this program, we often consider the fall of print journalism, the rise of digital media. to understand what it means for our democracy. Today, we add to that effort by hearing from a man whose career is the very story of that transformation. Stephen Shepard made his first $50 in journalism in 1960 when an article he wrote for a quarterly called The City College Vector got reprinted in Science Digest. Today, he is the founding dean of the highly digital Graduate School of Journalism here at the City University. In between, Shepard was for 2 decades editor-in-chief of Business Week, national editor of Newsweek, editor of the Saturday Review, and more. It's all detailed in a new memoir entitled Deadlines and Disruptions, My Turbulent Path From Print to Digital. Steve Shepard, welcome.
Thank you very much, Brian. Nice to be here.
So since we're on between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you tell the story in the book of your father dispatching you on the sly on a Jewish holiday to buy a New York Times.
Yes. Well, my father was very, very interested in politics and very, very interested in sports. So naturally, he devoured media. He would listen to the 6 o'clock news on the radio, and he didn't want to miss the New York Times any day. But on Yom Kippur, he spent the whole day in synagogue and fasting, and it was a serious holiday. And so he would tell me as a little boy, he gave me a nickel to go to Kingsbridge Road in the Bronx to buy the New York Times, but hide it under my jacket so no one would see that I had committed an act of commerce on the holiest day of the year.
And you weren't going directly into journalism. You were a science guy first.
Yeah, I studied engineering in college and in fact got a master's degree in engineering from Columbia. You know, for not the best of reasons. It was the post-Sputnik era. My uncle was an engineer, and I was sort of afraid to be a journalist. I didn't know what it meant. So I started out used my engineering training to start out as a science writer, which is what the Science Digest article was about.
And what was it actually about? Do you remember?
The Science Digest?
Yeah.
Oh, of course. Your first article you always remember.
Of course.
Like your first love. It was called The Eyes and Ears of a Missile, and it was how we manufactured parts in these clean rooms, mostly in California, for missile technology, a form of manufacturing that we had never seen before, and that was what the story was about.
And we actually need more people like that in journalism today, don't we? People with a science or a technical understanding in our science-drenched and technology-drenched world.
We need people who are versed in science. We need people who've studied economics. We need philosophers. We need history majors. Yeah, I mean, knowing content is very, very important to do journalism.
You were a reporter at Business Week long before you were the boss. Tell us about the cover story you did regarding Union Carbide that really helped to put you and your career on the map.
Think back to 1970. I was dispatched, I was a young reporter, I was dispatched to a town in West Virginia called Alloy, West Virginia. It was called Alloy because the centerpiece of the town was a ferroalloy smelting plant run by Union Carbide. It was considered the dirtiest factory in the United States, and it was an early test of the ground level power of local environmentalists. Ralph Nader was involved, and environmental regulators versus an intransigent corporation.
And you give a very visual description in the book of what that town looked like when you walked in, which was what?
It wasn't on any local map even. There was just nothing there except this big smelting plant. And I went down there twice. I interviewed all kinds of local people, environmentalists, regulators, and so on, and the company as well, and wrote a cover story called A Corporate Polluter Learns the Hard Way. And 4 years later, I went back, and they had cleaned up the plant in Alloy. It was a remarkable test of the strength of government regulation to bring about social good.
And so is the relationship between that and journalism today the fact that there were many well-funded newsrooms with lots of editors to take in the work of young reporters and make sure they're right and make sure they're told well, bureaus around the world? Is that a comparison worth making?
Sure is. In those days, and well into the late 90s and early 2000s, journalism was pretty well staffed in this country. When I was the editor of Business Week, we had 250 people, full-time people on the editorial staff of the magazine. We had bureaus all around the world. We had the resources to send people and do stories. And as the world changed on us, a lot of magazines and newspapers have had to cut back, and so they have much less journalistic muscle to do these kind of stories. The other thing that's disappeared is the mentoring that we got as young people from senior people on the staff. these days, the staffs are so small, they have to not only put out their newspaper or magazine, but they have to blog and do podcasts and so on. And there's really no time to train young people.
I think it's fair to say that with the explosion of the web and mobile technology and everything else, there's a tremendous amount of journalism, or at least writing, being consumed. I think it's accurate to say that there are more people reading New York Times articles today than there were before the web, just to take one publication's example. But that doesn't mean that they can make money at it in the same way.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, more people consume the New York Times today. One statistic that always gets me is that a New York Times story is tweeted every 4 seconds. And so the use of social media and the web has distributed journalism much more widely. It's a much more decentralized, much more democratized process because people can now talk back. So I don't think the problem is journalism per se. There's more journalism being done today by more people on more platforms than ever before. The problem is, how do we support financially quality journalism in the digital age, because the traditional business model of journalism has collapsed.
The traditional business model of journalism has collapsed, but isn't one going to be invented? I say this as an optimist, not as somebody who has a crystal ball. If there are so many people reading so much journalism today and distributing it themselves via Twitter, via Facebook, via whatever, that there's some way that news organizations can reasonably monetize their own content, as they did in the past through advertising and newspaper and magazine sales?
Yeah, one hopes that's the case. If you look at the traditional business model, typically on a print product, newspapers, magazines, let me talk about that because I know them so well, 20% of the revenue came from circulation and 80% came from advertising. Well, in this world, there's very little income from circulation because content is largely free on the web. And the advertising has collapsed because ad rates are so low on the web. They're still higher in print, but it's disappearing in print. So what we have to do is charge people for content, and it's good to see that some newspapers, about 25% of newspapers in the United States, are starting to charge readers now. And we have to get advertising rates up online, which can be done. But we have to change the way we're selling advertising. It can't be done by the volume of the traffic. It's very hard to monetize traffic. You have to have sponsorships. It's a little more like the TV model. You have to target people with your advertising. The internet is about targeting and personalization. That's what it can do that nothing else can do. And advertisers want to reach customers who are interested in what they have to sell. The media companies are not yet doing a good enough job of targeting advertising and content onto interested people. And
so at the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, one of the main things that you teach, or one of the things that the school is getting known for, is teaching entrepreneurial journalism.
Yeah. We define entrepreneurial journalism as a fusion of journalism, business, and technology, and we're trying to get our students to understand that they have to take responsibility not just for the journalism side of the product, but also the business side. And I don't mean we need to break down the walls between church and state, advertising and editorial. I just mean they need to be involved in new product development, developing new business models for their audiences, and so on. We've gotten to the point where we now teach everybody to be a converged journalist. We teach the eternal verities, reporting, writing, critical thinking, ethical values, and we teach all the interactive multimedia stuff. But in addition, now we're trying to say, you have to take responsibility for the financial success of this journalistic enterprise, otherwise it isn't going to succeed.
What do you say to maybe the old line journalists or others who are skeptical of the term entrepreneurial journalism and think, wait a minute, journalism is a higher calling. This is not about figuring out how to make a buck.
Well, in order to serve a higher calling, you have to make a buck because it's not sustainable unless there's profit. The revenue has to exceed the cost in any operation. I don't care if you're a nonprofit or a profit maker. Otherwise it goes out of business. It ceases to exist. So what I say to people who are skeptical about this is, look, we want you to do journalism just the way you've always done it. We don't want you to pay attention to advertising considerations. Go and do the best possible stories. But somebody has to be thinking about the sustainability of this as a business.
Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Are you sad about the changes in journalism in your lifetime?
Depends on which day you get me. I'm optimistic sometimes, and sometimes I worry a lot more. I'm sad by it because, one of the things that's difficult for me and traditional journalists who grew up in the world that I grew up and have to make the transition to the new world, is that we've sort of been dethroned. You know, in the old world, we took great pride in our professionalism in sorting out what was important for you, the readers. And we gave it meaning and context and synthesis and understanding, and on our best days, something approaching wisdom. Then the world changed on us and it became a two-way street. It wasn't just a product, it was a process. It was a conversation with the audience. Anybody could be a journalist, or at least commit an act of journalism. And we were kind of dethroned, and it was a tough transition psychologically for people like me. And thank God for the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, because I was able to stay with the young people and learn how to do it and learn what it was all about and learn why it was important.
You can read a lot about that transition in Steve Shepard's life and in the life of our country in his new book, Deadlines and Disruption, My Turbulent Path From Print to Journalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Up next, how would you spend $1 million to improve your neighborhood? Participatory budgeting in the Big Apple.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college.
No, I didn't quit my job.
I'm finishing my degree with a CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life.
Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY.
And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you are really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
Mom, I'm not gonna go to college.
What are you saying? You've got to go to college.
Well, they offered me a job and...
Son, college is much more important.
No.
Yes.
No, Mom.
Yes.
Anyways, it's my decision.
Okay, well then decide what degree you're going to get, because you will go to college.
Their tomorrow depends on your words today. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund has the information you need to help your kids go to college.
It's called Participatory Budgeting, and it began 23 years ago in Porto Alegre, Brazil. In short, it's ordinary people directly deciding how to spend part of their municipal budgets. In Brazil, it made for better schools and more running water. The idea spread through Latin America and elsewhere. Then 1 year ago, to help boost community involvement in their districts, 4 New York City council members gave their constituents control over a piece of their budgets. Here is part of a video from Brooklyn Council member Brad Lander promoting the idea.
It's very exciting, and it's a very democratic process.
People are actually getting to vote on concrete projects in their community that their neighbors came up with.
If you really want to create a sense of citizenship and community, this is the way to do it.
Bringing people together, working in groups, coming up with projects, and having a chance to work with your neighbors on making the neighborhood better.
This particular project is to improve the safety of an intersection.
One of the things we're looking to do with the proposal is to put in a movable dance floor.
We're trying to get some money for the technology that does all this, the green screen and for the cameras to headphones.
It felt like I have control over what projects my representatives put money towards.
It's something different to really get to have a very direct say on things you want in your neighborhood. This is like our school, our park, our library, and we care about it and we want a chance to make it better, and here it is.
I think I would like to get more involved in the process from now on out, just because I think it's great.
Well, now the first results are in, and participatory budgeting is showing promise. Let's catch up with two leading practitioners to see what has been learned and what the future might hold for this unique experiment in democracy. Brad Lander is councilman for the 39th District in Brooklyn, including Park Slope, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Windsor Terrace, Kensington, and Borough Park. We are also joined by Sondra Youdelman, who you also saw in that video, Executive Director of Community Voices Heard, a community group focusing on low-income women here in New York. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And Councilman, tell us more, because people are starting to get the idea but may not have it fully. How does this actually work?
Yeah, it's a great process, and it really does engage people in very deep ways. At first, people think, oh, I'll get to vote at the end, but it's not just at the end that people are involved. They come out to some of the meetings you saw there. Hundreds of people around the city in the 4 districts that did it last year. Over 2,000 people came to what we call neighborhood assemblies. Learned a little about the process, get in small groups, and come up with ideas. What needs fixing in your neighborhood? What's missing? What's dangerous? What needs to be better? And they come up with all these ideas, brainstorm. Some crazy, many very practical. Some you're frustrated you need to spend money on, and those get generated. We had in my district over 800 ideas. People then, over a few months, volunteer as budget delegates, and they meet in committees with their neighbors to take all those ideas, figure out what's feasible, how much would it cost, winnow them down to projects that can go on a ballot. We had 20 projects on the ballot in my district, about the same throughout the city, and then it goes to a vote, and everybody that lives in the neighborhood can come out and vote, and the projects that get the most votes, up to, in our case, $1 million, we put $1 million on the table. That's what we put forward for funding in this year's budget.
So I'm dying from suspense. What won?
7 projects in my district. The top to fix some horrific school bathrooms in a public school on the edge of Park Slope. Basically, the stalls, too small, and the kids, they didn't have doors as a result. And so the kids had to go to the bathroom in stalls with no doors. And people just thought the DOE won't fix that because they're functional, they flush. And people just said that's rotten.
A low standard.
A low standard. And, you know, it gets part of what's great about the process is it generates conversation about how we should do these things. The second one, a big compost project. A lot of environmentalists in the district want to reduce organic waste. We spend about $100 million a year in the city on it. Big compost project. Third, plant more trees. So 7 won. But also, you know, schools, street safety, environment, similar things in the other districts.
Yeah. And Sondra, what was your involvement in year 1?
Well, Community Voices Heard played the role of the lead community engagement partner, and we helped to initially bring this process here to New York City, and then helped to engage the community, both at the district level and then at the individual level. We first learned about the process years ago when some of our members had the privilege of going down to Porto Alegre, Brazil, to attend the World Social Forum and learn about this innovative process that the Workers' Party actually brought to the city of Porto Alegre as a way not only to engage citizens in deciding about their community, but also to promote equity. And they've gotten to the point where 20% of their budget is decided upon by about 50,000 people. And we thought this was an amazing idea. Our members came back really inspired about how they could be more active in making the decisions that affected their communities. But then they thought there's no way we could ever get this into New York City. Well, a couple years passed and we started to do some research also on public housing in New York City and how we could engage residents in being more active in decision making around public housing decisions. And we found out that up in Toronto, participatory budgeting was done in social housing with about $9 million a year and a number of residents making those decisions. And we thought, this is really doable.
So Councilman Lander was describing some of the things that came to the fore in this process, that bathrooms in public schools story, parks, things that are very neighborhood oriented, obviously. Were you surprised at all by the things that wound up, you know, floating to the top of people's priorities?
I think there was less of a surprise about what the priorities were. There were some limitations around what this money could be spent on, right? So it wasn't just an open pot of money that people could decide whatever they wanted. And I think I might have been more surprised had it been completely open. But I think the real surprise about it was how many new people got engaged in the process and how many new relationships were built, and how many new people were just inspired to work together to solve community problems. And some of the stuff that really excited us the most was really the increased engagement, particularly among low-income residents and also residents of color. So people traditionally marginalized from political processes and less likely to vote were actually coming out and participating in much higher percentages than they do in traditional elections.
Do you worry, Councilman, about a kind of tokenism with respect to this amount of money? I mean, $1 million sounds like a lot to the average person, but what's the city budget? Is it $60 billion a year with a B? So $1 million is a very small amount of money actually to give the public control over. Is it more symbolic than real?
Well, no. First, these are projects people really want in their neighborhoods, you know, and there's nothing, you know, they say all politics is local, and that's not just an aphorism for elections. It's because what people care most about is the intersection that my kids have to cross every day safe. You know, is the basketball court in our public housing development not full of cracks and a place that we can play ball? So those things really matter very tangibly, and people pretty rarely have the opportunity to influence government to do the things that they and their neighbors most want. And even just for $1 million, a lot of people got that. But it's also true that by engaging people, bringing them together with neighbors, having the frustration of dealing with the bureaucracy that won't let you do the project the way you want to do it, thinking about where the revenue's coming from to pay for these things, engages people in thinking about the budget at the much bigger scale. And that's really important
is there kind of an activism bias? That is, those people who choose to get engaged in this process, it's still going to be a minority of any community, and they're going to have their particular interests, whereas the majority of people in the community probably are still not going to vote, even as democratic as this is relative to what usually goes on.
I mean, I think over time we're really looking at trying to engage more and more people, and 6,000 people voted in the last election, last year, in the 4 different council districts, and that's 6,000 more people than typically make those decisions when council members on their own really make those decisions in consultation, but without the community really being able to vote on that. I mean, one other thing I would just say in terms of it being a small amount of money to start with, I think the longer term vision is really to transform democratic process and participation at large, both in the budget and in other city governmental processes, and how can we engage more people in that.
Do you see more city council districts starting to do this in year 2?
Yes, so there were 4 of us last year. There are 8 of us this year. So we doubled in size. 4 of our colleagues thought that's a great idea. Last year it was 1 in Manhattan and the Bronx, 2 in Brooklyn, 1 in Queens. We've added another 2 more Brooklyn and 2 more Queens council members. So it's growing, and I can see a time when more and more council members would do it. And I think other city agencies as well. We had great interactions with the Parks Department, the Department of Transportation, the School Construction Authority, who I think there's folks in each of those places who at least like the idea of having people more involved in shaping.
Did you find yourself at any point, even just in your mind, in tension with the people in the community and what their priorities were? In other words, you're an elected official. To be an expert in how money can best be used in the community, and you study these issues all day and all week for a living. And if somebody who isn't as knowledgeable is suddenly empowered to spend $1 million of those dollars, you could, in theory, wind up thinking, oh, that's what they think they want, but this is not the best use of the money in my community.
You could, but I was really, I don't want to say surprised, but pleased by the responsibility people took, especially those volunteers who shaped the ballot. So there were some wacky ideas at the beginning, for sure. The Gondola, a gondola for the Gowanus Canal.
Oh, I like that.
Public seltzer fountains, which I think would be wonderful, but might not be the best use of the $1 million. The wackier ideas, as fun as they were, didn't make the ballot. The people, you know, really thought we should make responsible decisions. There were some tensions because wrestling with bureaucracy, with what you can do with public dollars, with how to make projects happen, is hard. But, you know, that's what democracy is about, and even that, I think, had a lot of positive value.
I think we're going to see something like the Gondola in our next segment, actually. We'll leave folks in a little bit of suspense about that.
I mean, I think another piece of the tension, if I can just add that, is that it's a little bit of money initially, right? But one of the things that this process really does is connect people to government and to the services and the programs that we need in our communities in a much more real way. And so it also inspired people, I think, to start exploring how do we how do we value government more than we have been? How do we really start thinking about what we need in our communities? How do we also start talking about the revenue that we need to expand so that all the things that we need in our communities can actually be provided?
All right. Participatory budgeting coming soon to a city council district near you, at least twice as many as last year. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Up next, speaking of gondolas, Superfund at a Superfund site on the water.
Did you know that getting up and getting active for just 60 minutes a day is all it takes to help you get stronger, look better, and feel great?
Or that fresh fruits and veggies aren't just healthier and crunchier, they can taste better too?
Eating better and getting more active is easier than you think.
Yeah! Keep watching for some fun and easy ways to discover the magic of healthy living in your life.
America.
Let's get healthy together!
Along with weight loss, it's one of the many ways to fight osteoarthritis pain. For more information on managing pain, go to fightarthritispain.org.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Switch to Energy Star light bulbs, and you'll realize just how much cash you are really burning through. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
Into each life, a little rain must fall. And what rains on our cities flows into what we drink. The Arbor Day Foundation invites you to plant trees in your community, so the water that flows into our rivers and streams will be clean and safe. Visit arborday.org to find out how to plant the right trees in the right place. And support Tree City USA where you live. Go to arborday.org.
For almost 150 years, the Newtown Creek in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, has been home to industrial waste dumping on a massive scale, and also quite ominously become better known as the site of America's second largest oil spill. Not exactly the kind of publicity that's attracting many tourists to the area. So how does one turn a Superfund site into a super fun site? Take a look at this video.
Hi, I'm Sarah Nelson Wright.
I'm Nathan Kensinger.
And I'm Laura Chipley. We're the artists creating the Newtown Creek Armada, an interactive boat pond on the Newtown Creek.
The Newtown Creek is one of America's most polluted bodies of water. This 3.5-mile-long industrial waterway is located off of the East River in New York City, on the border between Brooklyn and Queens. Since the 1800s, the Newtown Creek has been a dumping ground for industrial pollution and sewage, and is the site of the second largest oil spill in U.S. history. However, the Newtown Creek was recently designated as a Superfund site by the Environmental Protection Agency, giving nearby communities hope that it'll be finally cleaned up. Thousands of people live near the Newtown Creek, but there are few ways for them to interact with it. We're creating the Armada to bring New Yorkers out to the Newtown Creek.
The Newtown Creek Armada will take place in September 2012, when we will launch a fleet of miniature, remote-controlled boats into the Newtown Creek. And you, the local community, and everyone in New York will be invited to come pilot our unique fleet of handcrafted boats at the Newtown Creek Nature Walk. Each boat in the Armada will be created with materials found around this Superfund site, and will represent a different aspect of life in the area. Additionally, each boat will be outfitted with an underwater video camera, allowing visitors to see under the surface and to help document the hidden world of the creek. Visitors to the Armada will also view video installations of other explorations from around the Newtown Creek shores. The Armada will use cutting-edge optical, wireless, and remote control technologies to present this public art project.
But we need your help to make this project possible. Our goal is to bring people out to witness the pollution in their city, but also to see how the community is working to clean up and revitalize this body of water for the future.
To achieve our goal and launch the Armada, we still need to purchase underwater cameras, monitoring systems, and materials for our video kiosks. Thanks for your support. We hope you'll come out and join us at the Newtown Creek Armada in September.
So our next guests are two of the artists who made that video and launched the Armada, Nathan Kensinger and Sarah Nelson Wright. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So you want people to go out and touch that stuff?
Well, I think part of our idea is that they get to sort of virtually touch it and virtually be in the water. And we've already had our boat pond open for the last 2 Saturdays. So we've had people coming out, piloting the boats, interacting with each other on the water through this fleet of 9 boats.
And what does that accomplish besides a good time at the shore?
Well, for us, it's really about bringing people down to the Newtown Creek. We've run into people who live just a few blocks away from that body of water in New York who don't even know that it exists. So we're trying to raise awareness about the Newtown Creek and have people feel that they're empowered to come down and engage in the water in some way.
Is it the people who live near there and don't know about it, is that because the water isn't usable to them in some way, that it could be, or why would that be?
Well, there's not very many public access points, and in fact where we do our project is a nature walk that's part of the wastewater treatment plant on the Newtown Creek, and it's one of the few places the public can go out and enjoy being down by the water and also enjoy seeing some of the amazing infrastructure that's around the Newtown Creek. It's one of the largest, I think the largest wastewater treatment plant in New York City. Our pond is across from barges that transport crushed cars to be used as scrap, as well as it's a small inlet right off this commercial waterway where you can see barges and tugboats.
No gondolas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did the videos that got taken by the boats get produced and distributed anywhere?
Well, basically, we've created 3 different videos that we're showing at the installation site that show different parts of the Newtown Creek. And when people come visit the Armada, they're producing their own video. They're actually filming the creek because the boats have these cameras on them. So people will be filming as they're piloting the boat, and we're going to take all of that material and do a gallery installation where people will be kind of immersed into the Newtown Creek water.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be an art project
Absolutely.
showing what it looks like to be in, via these boats, electronically controlled, one of the most polluted waterways in New York City.
Yeah, yeah.
Could this backfire? In terms of making people go, oh, instead of wanting to go down there and get involved?
That's a good question. I mean, people will be coming out and seeing the pollution that exists on the Newtown Creek. It's very visible pollution. You see raw sewage that's been dumped into the water. You see the oil slick on the surface of the water. So part of it really is getting people to come out and visibly witness the pollution on the Newtown Creek. But for us, that's the trade-off. It's like you're coming here, you may be having a fun time, but really it's about kind of raising your awareness about this very visible pollution.
Yeah, so a consciousness raising that you hope will lead to political action?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely seen that it leads to interest. Like, I've seen a lot of people who've come out to our installation start asking questions about the Newtown Creek. We've had some children come out, seeing them ask their parents, oh, what is that? We're right across from the big digester eggs on the, from the sanitation plant. And I think, it's, my hope, or our hope, that will translate into people, taking a stake in this body of water, taking a stake in the cleanup, which there will be a Superfund cleanup, as well as, there's already been some attempts at remediating some of the oil spill.
Tell me more about the boats themselves. The video said that they're made in part with materials from that area?
So each boat is a fiberglass hull, but then from the deck up, we really created these boats that contain materials we found on our own voyages on the Newtown Creek. So we have a boat that's called the scrap boat that's covered with scrap metal that we got from a local scrap yard. We have the trash boat, which is collected from basically floating plastic debris that's on the creek. And then the nature boat has been a big hit. That's things that grow along the edges of the creek. We put them on the boat, so it has this great kind of reed tail that flies behind it as it sails on the creek.
And what would you count as success of this project? Do the videos need to go viral to a certain degree, or what would you say?
That's a good question because there is sort of different levels of impact. We're having great turnout at the boat pond, which I think we're all really happy about, but it would also be wonderful if we could get another level of people to see the project online. And we do have a video that we put out at the beginning that's some samples of the footage we took, which are in parts of the creek that you can only get to by canoe, that many people saw online, and we were very excited about that.
That had a little mini viral hit, I would say. It went out to, in the first day, about 5,000 people saw this video on Boing Boing and Gothamist, and it was featured on Wired.com as well.
And so what nerve did it strike? Can you put it into words?
Well, we edited it to kind of show people the return of nature, actually, so it was kind of a surprise for people to see this video. It had, footage of raccoons we found along the creek, birds, crabs in the water.
So it's not only a video of, oh, isn't this disgusting, something needs to be done, but how it can be brought back.
Yeah, I mean, we've been surprised really by the amount of nature we've seen along the Newtown Creek. It's slowly making its way back. In the space where we have the boat pond, there's just hundreds of crabs living in the water that you can see on a day-to-day basis.
How does this fit into the rest of your work as artists? What else have you done?
That's a great question, actually. We all have work that that I would say relates to some aspect of the Newtown Creek. Personally, I've done some work about industry in Brooklyn. I'm very interested in small manufacturing and sort of that kind of job, I guess, related to the earlier section on the show. That kind of job is sort of a sustainable and viable thing for the working class in New York, and there's a lot of amazing industry on the creek.
Yeah.
And you?
Yeah. My own work is as a documentary filmmaker and photographer, and I've really been exploring the New York City waterfront for the last decade, photographing parts of the waterfront that are kind of off limits, closed to the public. I do urban exploration photography, and I also go out in boats and explore the waterways that way as well.
That's great. It's art, it's hands-on, it's experiential, it says something, it's interesting to look at, all wrapped up in one. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for this week. We debut a new program each Wednesday evening at 7:30. Next time, from a Precious City University archive, Elections Past. Mayor LaGuardia campaigns on the silver screen. And tune into my daily radio show on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, free trade as an issue in the presidential campaign. And thanks for watching. I'm Brian Lehrer.